Ephemeral promises. The greenhouse door slid open with a soft hiss, bringing with it a waft of humid air and the earthy scent of soil and green things. Nolan Wright didn't look up from the delicate purple bloom he was examining through his magnifying glass. His fingers, steady despite the morning's third cup of coffee, carefully adjusted the pedal to catch the light. "I've never seen anything like it," a voice said from behind him. Nolan startled, nearly dropping his tools. He turned to find a woman he'd never seen before standing at the entrance to his workspace. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore the standard white lab coat of the Institute, though hers looked crisp and new compared to his worn one. "Sorry," she said, stepping forward. "Professor Barrett said I could find you here. I'm Camilla Vargas, your new research partner." Nolan blinked. "My what? Theodore didn't tell you?" She frowned, extending her hand. "I've been assigned to work with you on the Midnight Orchid project. I specialized in rare flora preservation at Universidad de los Andes." He reluctantly shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip despite her slender fingers. "There must be some mistake. I work alone." "Not anymore," she replied with an easy smile that somehow made the statement less confrontational than it should have been. "The grant committee insisted on collaboration for Phase 2. Something about ensuring the project's continuity." Nolan turned back to his orchid, a rare species he'd spent 3 years cultivating. The midnight purple petals with their luminescent edges were his life's work, a potential breakthrough in botanical bioluminescence that could have applications far beyond pretty flowers. And now the Institute was forcing a partner on him. "I don't need help," he muttered, adjusting his microscope. "Perhaps not," Camilla said, walking around to the other side of his workbench. "But I do. This fellowship is my chance to work with the best, and according to everything I've read, that's you." Despite himself, Nolan felt a flicker of pride at her words. He glanced up, meeting eyes the color of amber honey, warm and direct. Something in them made him pause. "I won't get in your way," she continued. "I'm here to learn and contribute. The Midnight Orchid could change everything we know about sustainable light sources. I want to be part of that." Over the next few weeks, Nolan found his initial resistance fading. Camilla was not just intelligent but insightful, spotting patterns in the orchid's growth cycle that he'd missed. Her presence in the greenhouse became less intrusion and more welcome companion. Her quiet humming as she worked somehow soothing against the background of rustling leaves and the soft bubbling of hydroponic systems. "You were right about the phosphorus levels," he admitted one evening as they watched the orchid's petals begin their gentle glow in the dimming light. "The adjustment made a significant difference." Camilla smiled, the blue-purple light playing across her features. "We make a good team." Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. In the 6 months they'd worked together, she'd become more than a colleague. Their late nights in the lab, shared lunches at the small cafe across from the Institute, weekends spent hiking to study native flora. When had she slipped past his carefully constructed barriers? "Nolan," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something." They sat on the bench outside the greenhouse, the spring evening mild around them. Camilla's hands twisted in her lap, uncharacteristically nervous. "I've been offered a position at the International Botanical Research Center in Zurich," she said. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. 3 years studying endangered alpine species with full funding and resources." Nolan felt something cold spread through his chest. "That's congratulations." "I haven't accepted yet," she said quickly. "I wanted to talk to you first." "Why?" The word came out harsher than he intended. Camilla looked at him, those amber eyes searching his face. "Because in these 6 months you've become important to me. More than I expected, more than perhaps is wise." Nolan stood abruptly, unable to process the competing emotions colliding within him. Pride in her achievement, dismay at her leaving, and beneath it all a recognition of feelings he'd been denying for months. "You should take it," he said, voice tight. "It's an incredible opportunity." "Is that all you have to say?" she asked quietly. He turned away, focusing on the distant lights of the city beyond the Institute grounds. "What else is there? We're colleagues, Camilla. Good colleagues. Your career should come first." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things he couldn't bring himself to say. "I see," she finally said, standing. "Then I'll submit my acceptance tomorrow. I'll have 2 weeks to finish our current phase of research before I leave." Nolan nodded stiffly, not trusting himself to speak. As the days passed, he retreated into cool professionalism, ignoring the hurt in Camilla's eyes, the tentative openings she offered for deeper conversation. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner, less complicated. His sister Olivia disagreed. "You're being an idiot," she told him bluntly over dinner at her apartment. "You're clearly in love with her." "It doesn't matter," Nolan insisted, pushing food around his plate. "Her future is in Zurich. And yours could be too if you weren't so stubborn. There are botanical institutes all over the world, Nolan." On Camilla's last day, the greenhouse felt emptier somehow, despite nothing having been removed. She finished her final notes, placed them neatly in the shared folder, and smiled at him one last time. "Goodbye, Nolan," she said softly. "Take care of our orchids." He watched her walk away, tears glistening in her eyes as she turned at the door for one final glance. It was only after the door closed behind her that he realized the hollow feeling in his chest wasn't just sadness. It was the sensation of his heart going with her. Scattered petals, the midnight orchid withered 3 weeks after Camilla left. Nolan stood before the dying plant. Its once vibrant petals now curled and blackened at the edges. The luminescent glow faded to a dull, intermittent flicker. He'd followed every protocol, maintained every environmental control, yet somehow the plant had sensed the absence of its co-caretaker. "Plants don't have feelings," he muttered to himself, adjusting the humidity control for the 5th time that day. The rational part of his brain knew this was true, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the orchid was mourning just as he was. Professor Barrett's reflection appeared in the glass of the environmental chamber. "Any improvement?" Nolan shook his head without turning around. "The decay is progressing despite all interventions. We'll lose the primary specimen within days." "We," Barrett noted with gentle emphasis. "You're still using the plural." Nolan's shoulders stiffened. "Habit?" "You haven't answered any of her emails," Barrett said, moving to stand beside him. The older man's weathered face held none of the judgment Nolan had expected, only concern. "She asks about you in every message to the department." "The project continues," Nolan replied, deliberately misunderstanding. "I've cross-pollinated the secondary specimens and started new seedlings with the modified phosphorus levels she suggested." Barrett sighed. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. Camilla didn't just leave the project, Nolan. She left you." "She didn't leave me," Nolan snapped, finally turning to face his mentor. "There was nothing to leave. We were colleagues who worked well together. That's all?" The professor's knowing gaze made him look away. "If that's the story you need to tell yourself, I won't argue. But Camilla Vargas brought something to this greenhouse beyond scientific expertise. Since she's been gone, not only is the orchid failing, you are too." After Barrett left, Nolan slumped onto his lab stool, staring at the dying plant. He'd thrown himself into work these past weeks, staying late, arriving early, hardly eating or sleeping. His sister Olivia had taken to appearing at the greenhouse with containers of homemade food, sitting silently with him until he ate at least a few bites. "You know what your problem is?" she'd said yesterday, watching him pick at her lasagna. "You think your heart is some precious, rare specimen that needs to be kept under glass, protected, controlled. But hearts don't work that way. Nolan, they need freedom to grow." He'd ignored her then, but her words returned to him now as he watched the orchid's last glowing petal dim. Perhaps some things weren't meant to be controlled. The next morning, Dr. James Whitaker, head of the Applied Botany Division, appeared at Nolan's workstation. His usual energetic demeanor seemed subdued. "I heard about the midnight orchid," he said by way of greeting. "I'm sorry, Nolan. I know what that project meant to you." Nolan nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I have something that might interest you," Whitaker continued, placing a tablet on the desk. "We've received funding for a collaborative project with the Art Institute. They're creating an exhibition on the intersection of science and art, focusing on botanical pigmentation. We need someone who understands the chemical structures behind natural colorants." Nolan glanced at the proposal without real interest. "I'm not sure I'm the right person." "You're exactly the right person," Whitaker insisted. "And frankly, you need to get out of this greenhouse. The artist liaison will be here tomorrow morning. Just meet with her, that's all I'm asking." Nolan agreed, mainly to end the conversation, but the next morning found him reluctantly cleaning his cluttered office in or art. As Marcella outlined her vision for the exhibition, Nolan found himself drawn into the conversation despite his initial reluctance. Her enthusiasm was infectious, her understanding of botanical chemistry surprisingly sophisticated for an artist. Before he realized it, 2 hours had passed, and they'd sketched out a preliminary collaboration involving extracted pigments from his research specimens. "Same time next week?" Marcella asked as she gathered her materials. "I'll bring some canvas samples for testing the pigment application techniques." Nolan nodded, surprised to find he was actually looking forward to it. Over the following weeks, their collaboration expanded. Nolan found himself visiting the Art Institute to observe Marcella's studio process, while she spent hours in his lab learning about extraction methods and chemical stabilizers. Her perspective on his work, seeing beauty where he saw only data, gradually shifted something within him. "You need to get out more," she told him one evening as they waited for a pigment test to complete. "When was the last time you saw the sun setting outside this building?" "I see the sunset through the greenhouse glass every day," he countered. Marcella rolled her eyes. "That's not the same, and you know it. Come on. I know a spot on campus where you can see the whole city laid out like a painting." Before he could protest, she was pulling him by the arm, leading him through the institute and up a service stairwell he'd never noticed before. They emerged onto a maintenance roof, where the setting sun was indeed painting the city in hues of orange and purple that reminded him painfully of the midnight orchid. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Marcella said, leaning against the railing. "Some things you have to experience directly. No glass barriers, no controlled environment." Nolan nodded, something loosening in his chest as the breeze ruffled his hair. "My sister would agree with you." "Smart woman, your sister," Marcella smiled. "Now tell me about this Camilla person who's got you wearing your heart like a wound." Nolan's head snapped toward her in surprise. "What, who told you?" "Nobody had to tell me," she shrugged. "It's written all over your face whenever someone mentions the Midnight Orchid Project. And Olivia might have filled in some details when she dropped off lunch for you last week." "Traitor," Nolan muttered, but without heat. "She's worried about you," Marcella said simply. "So am I, if we're being honest. You're brilliant, Nolan, but you're letting yourself wither away just like that orchid." Nolan turned back to the sunset, unable to meet her gaze. "It's not that simple." "It rarely is," she agreed. "But sometimes the first step is just admitting what you've lost and what you're afraid to find again." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Nolan felt the words he'd been holding back for months finally escape. "She took my heart with her when she left," he whispered, "and I didn't even realize it until she was already gone." Marcella's hand found his on the railing, a gentle pressure of understanding. "The wonderful thing about hearts," she said softly, "is that they can grow back stronger, even after being broken." In the gathering darkness, Nolan let himself believe, for the first time since Camilla's departure, that perhaps she was right.